Hi, this video is the part of the revision series I am doing over the various topics in Python, data science, and statistics. I prepared some notes which I will be sharing with you. The agenda is to have walkthrough over these PDF files. The first file discusses about dir method in Python. Dir is a very helpful method in Python which returns a sorted list of strings which have the names defined inside a module. For example, if you call a math function inside a dir function, so dir math, it will return a list of these items, and these items are all the type of things, be it a method or a constant or a hidden magic function. So these all are inside the math function, which basically gives insight about what are the things that is inside the math module, right? So here you can see I have done the dir math and it returns me the list of items inside that math module. It can be a constant, it can be a method. We will discuss in detail what are these various methods can do and how they are different. How exponential is different from id exponential, what is copy sign, what is spec is doing up here, what is loader. We will discuss all these things in detail. So what is a module in Python? Python module are anything, either it can be a runnable or a non-runnable code function or class, and when you are using a module you can import functions inside the module, or you can import the whole module itself, right? If for example, if you want to import a square root, right, so if you can do import a square root or factorial specific imports, or you can do a while character import star, it will import everything inside that function. Copy sign is the function returns a number with a value of a but with a sign of b. We are aware about all these functions. Power returns uh, power of a raised to the power b. For example, means 3 raised to power 2 means 9. We have all these trigonometric functions. Gamma function returns the gamma function of the argument. Hi, this video is the part of the revision series I am doing over the various topics in Python, data science, and statistics. I prepared some notes which I will be sharing with you. The agenda is to have walkthrough over these PDF files. The first file discusses about dir method in Python. Dir is a very helpful method in Python which returns a sorted list of strings which have the names defined inside a module. For example, if you call a math function inside a dir function, so dir math, it will return a list of these items, and these items are all the type of things, be it a method or a constant or a hidden magic function. So these all are inside the math function, which basically gives insight about what are the things that is inside the math module, right? So here you can see I have done the dir math and it returns me the list of items inside that math module. It can be a constant, it can be a method. We will discuss in detail what are these various methods can do and how they are different. how exponential is different from id exponential, what is copy sign, what is spec is doing up here, what is loader. We will discuss all these things in detail. So what is a module in Python? Python modules are anything, either it can be a runnable or a non-runnable code function or class. And when you are using a module, you can import functions inside the module, or you can import the whole module itself, right? If for example, if you want to import a square root, right, so if you can do import a square root or factorial specific imports, or you can do a while character import star, it will import everything inside that function. Copy sign is this, the function returns a number with a value of a but with a sign of b. We are aware about all these functions. Power returns uh, power of a raised to the power b. For example, means 3 raised to power 2 means 9. We have all these trigonometric functions. Gamma function returns the gamma function of the argument. Exponential, pi, these are all constant. In Python, infinity or in is infinity, none or is none, these are all can be used inside the math module. Similarly, in the calendar functions, we have all these object inside it. You can see epoch. Epoch is basically total time elapsed by the program, or total time elapsed since a particular calendar time. I think that is 1970 in seconds. So if you want to calculate the number of total time elapsed by a program, you can basically take time at two different instances and subtract them, which will return you the total time in seconds taken by the program. So in this PDF, we will start our discussion with basic algorithm analysis, and then we will move and resume our discussion on Python. Asymptotic analysis is the case where the provided input is tends to infinity, or the number is very much large. Then in those cases, which is generally the case, we use to analyze the code. But asymptotic analysis is not necessary when large inputs are never given to the program. Some algorithms have different best case and worst case complexity, time and space complexity, but selection sort, merge sort, heap sort, and radix sorts are exceptions. They all have same asymptotic analysis, or you can say a notation, big O notations for all the set of provided inputs. We have 5 types of notation that we have in algorithms, but most commonly are these 5. Apart among them, the big O notations is the most used among this. So big O notation, it says that the function that is basically representation of your code is no worse than a given value of gn, any given code. It can be log n, it can be n square, it can be n log n, it can be 2 factorial, whatever. So it says that big O notations, if your code is never going to exceed or no worse than the rate of growth is not worse than a given gn. Similarly, other notations are for different limit. Similarly, big theta, big omega, little omega. Here we have a basic cheat sheet to how to calculate the type of algorithms and their asymptotic complexity. We will discuss this thing in much detail later. As of now, I just want to like let you know that it is very much important. Okay, yeah. So Python doesn't support character type. These are treated as a string of length 1, right? I mean, even if you consider the substring. So here's a list of the inbuilt Python exceptions. I want to let you know that the Python exceptions, you can have user defined Python exceptions that you have to inherit and then built upon the base class exceptions. But that is another part of the discussion. As of now, these are the inbuilt type of exception that we have in Python. Assertion error is that when your any assert statement get failed, attribute assignment or referencing get failed, then you have the attribute error, end of file error, floating point, generate exit, import error, index error, key error. I mean, if you have any you're searching for any element in the dictionary and it is not found, then the key error is raised. Similarly, for the index, if you're searching any index and it is out of range, that exception is raised. Keyboard interrupt error, for example, any if you press Control C or delete, it will raise this error. Memory error, when your Python code runs out of memory. Name error, I mean, if you're trying to reference a use a variable that is out of the scope, it says name error. Not implemented error, I mean, if you have any method which is not implemented in its base class, then it's a not implemented error. OS error is caused by any such thing related to operating system. Overflow error is basically any arithmetic operation you are doing is exceeds the value of your supported platform, the inbuilt platform. Reference error is when you are trying to reference any object, but due to garbage collection, it has been already like it does not exist. Such kind of thing are came under reference error. Runtime error are those error which like I mean anything that we doesn't fall under any other category are called runtime error. When an error does not fall under any other category, it is called runtime error. I mean, I most of the cases we don't see get to see this runtime error, but because it has already been captured by some other error. Stop iteration error, and I mean the next function to indicate that there is no further item in the iterator that you are calling. Syntax error, indentation error, tab error, system exit when system.exit function is clicked. A type error when you are raised a function or operations is applied to an object which is of incorrect type, then type error is raised. Unbound local error raised when a reference is made to a local variable in a function or a method, but no value has been bound to that variable. Unicode error, decode error, translate error, value error, and zero division error. So these are basic error types. Sometimes questions come up regarding which of the following error type will be raised for a certain given code snippet. Okay, this is one use case with when you have, because we know that the strings in the Python are immutable. I mean, you cannot modify. So if there is a old string like this and then you want to replace this word in the old string, it will not modify the old string method. You have to assign it to the new string, then this will work. This is used to reverse give any given list. If you look at the syntax, it says that the start by default the first element, and by default the first, I mean, if there is nothing provided, then we have this first element followed by the end of element or the last element, and default is a step forward step 1, but I mean minus is for the reverse step. So why tuples are faster than the list? This question is commonly asked in the interviews. Tuples are basically an immutable set of memory allocations which is having that is there is a single block of memory. So it doesn't require an extra space to store new object. I mean it modifications, and that's why tuples are fast as compared to a list. Both of them has their own advantage and disadvantage. We will discuss it later. So use tuples when list is only read only. Yes. So tuples, as you know that if you want to create an iterator and you don't want to modify it, so it's better that you should use tuples instead of the list, because list will take extra time, additional time, and then it doesn't give you an advantage of writing, and you don't need to write. So tuples are better options. Same thing up here. So comparison of lists and tuples. Tuples and lists are compared lexicographically using comparison of the elements. I mean, lexicographically means if you want to compare and they are in format of string, so it will compare the first element if all the same, then it will go to the next element and then the next element. Each element must compare equal and the two sequence must be same type and have same length. The comparison operator in Python can work with the tuples itself. Here we have the hash functions, an example of the hash function if in the case of tuples, and you can see here the order matters. So if we hash a tuple which is in a reverse order, it returns a different value. But if you try to hash a list, it will return the unhashable type of the list. Here the common method on the dictionary items, d dot items is returns all item, and d dot key return all keys. So packing and unpacking. So x is a tuple with all the values. So by writing it in a reverse manner, you are basically unpacking the tuple, and then you can directly print the variable name. Just like in the case of dictionary also, for I comma j in d dot items, you can print the key or value pair combination for the dictionary itself. And this is another reason why tuples are the better approach when you want to make sure that the data you are writing through tuples are right protected. A common example of how we work in a dictionary, and this is also a way which we can declare multiple variables at the same time. So date time and time delta are very important functions in Python, and in interview in most of the scenarios one get confused when the questions comes regarding this thing. We will discuss the time delta and the date time module in the Python. So if you have to print the complete date time for today, like if you import date time, so date time, once there is a method date time inside the date time, so you have to take care what you are importing and then how you are writing. Okay, and it will print the date time into the level of microseconds. Date time, the date of today, it will print the date for today. If you look into the inside what are the methods applicable inside the datetime module, you will get to know it has the time delta, date time, date, time, date time CAPI and TJ info, and time zone and other methods available. The same is up here. You can see this whole thing. You can even extract the month, year, and date for the current date, the time class. So there's a time module inside the date time. You can declare a time function by providing hour, minute, and second, which is a keyworded argument, or even if you can pass a positional argument, it will take the time that you're providing. And then for a given time, you can also extract hour, minute, second, and microsecond from this. These all things are the example of how we can use the date time module, and then we come up to time delta method. Time delta is basically used to measure the differences between two times. So if we declare any t1 and t2 for a particular given parameters, and then we subtract, it will give us the differences between the time. It can also print the positive differences, and it can also print the negative differences of this thing. Time duration in seconds. T dot seconds is the method when you want to print the time in seconds. Here you can see you have it is normal in readable format, but if you want in seconds you or in minutes, you can use particular methods for the t object. Now there are two methods which are used to convert string time to time format and time format back to string format. The strf time is used to convert a datetime string into a string, datetime object into a string method. So in this case, you have to provide a format in which you want to convert the datetime into a string format. Percentage followed by these characters do have their meaning, and anything that is lies inside this thing is basically any character that you can put. So here I put slash and here it is column. So you can see this thing. The date times are printed into the string format, the format that we have defined. The strp time is used to convert the string format in date time, just the reverse of strft. So here we have the date string that we have printed, and we want to print the date string and then convert. So we have to exactly provide uh, the way it is written up in the format, and then we will convert it up here. So you can see the date string is in this format, and then after applying datetime.strp time followed by the data string by the format, you will get this. So the strp time takes two arguments. The first is the string or representation of the date and time that we have here, and followed by the format of code to the first argument. So there is another module y called pi-tz is used to mention the time zones. So if you call pi-tz or time zone and then pass the time zone name. So this is not anything that you put. There's a list of time zone names that you can only push to it will provide the time zone name. Okay, so if you put like Europe and London and date time dot now, you will get a time zone, London time zone for that particular date. So in summary, the date time module, we have date, time zone info and time delta. Inside date, we have date time and time zone info which we can use. Now there is another thing called calendar. Calendar is basically if you want to print the calendar for a particular year, you can use the calendar module, calendar.text calendar.thursday. So these are basically parameters that you can see in the documentation portion that we have to set, and then you will get a list of calendar dates. So these are normal os.path and import.path, path.isFile, path.exist. So these are basic libraries that you can use. This is particular example of how we use the urllib.request library to extract the HTML portion of the HTML. Pickling and unpickling. So these are basically used to convert object or byte into the string object into the string representation or byte representation, and this is to convert it back. These are used to, you can say, a streaming basically alternative of serializer in Java, pickling and unpickling methods. Excellence is deprecated in Python 3. Random to random, and these are random modules. You will get a random number. So what is dogpile effect and how you can prevent this? Dogpile is referred to an event when a cache expires and the website is hit by the multiple requests at the same time. So we use semaphore lock in this case. We will discuss about the semaphore lock, how we can use this thing to remediate the dogpile effect. Here you can see you can parameterize passing an argument of end into a print statement, basically install suppresses a new line to be appended, and this is a method of passing the environment variable. Now we'll discuss what are the things that are different from Python 2 and Python 3. So in Python 3, strings are Unicode. All the strings are Unicode, and Unicode is explicitly calling a Unicode method is not available in Python 3. You can see up here, these are the various formatting options, the string.format options that are there for formatting the strings into the format that we want. Similarly, for the representational format, you can see up here. So these formatting we will discuss in detail, how these formattings are used to format the strings. So these all have a common set of rules. So there are other methods which are omitted in Python 3. Among them is the print function, which is modified. Now we require the bracket, and we have the execute methods. So we have to pass the brackets, and the same for execute file. I don't think we need to know what Python versions look like, but we have to know that any code, if you look into code that have the older version of Python snippet, so we know that it should be navigated to the new version and how we can do this thing. Similarly, for the division method, in the old Python, you have to explicitly mention one of the parameters as float so that the output comes as 4, but that is already inbuilt in the Python 3.1 and onwards. And here you can see double forward slash is used if you want to get you can say a rounded value of the dividend. Similarly, here you can see this 0 is used to denote octal format of the code, so that you can also write notations in different formats. Similarly, there is a change in iterator functions. uh, iterator is now called inside the next function instead of as a dot method in the Python 2. So you can see there are a lot of things in terms of importing that have changed in Python. I don't think we need to know all these things in such a detail, but yes, knowing that these all exist in the first place and then how it has been changed will help if there is an issue with the code. So these all things were all there in Python. Now it is has changed to something else. We only need to know what is in the new version of the Python. So dictionary and set comprehensions are now used. List comprehensions are also used in the Python 3.1, which is a very effective tool to writing a single line code to operate on the list, which was not there. You have to use the for loops in the Python 2, but now it is there, and these are the formats that you have to use for the list and dictionary and set comprehensions. And then we have the list of all the Python packages which are available. The important one, we have extra. These are third-party packages. So if you want to import, and this is not a complete list. There must be some other packages which should be there, but these are the ones that were there and were constantly used by developer in all the projects. So we have one for admin panel, we have for algorithm designer pattern, we have for anti-spam, asset management, tools for managing and compressing the minifying the website's asset, audio libraries, we have authentication, build tools, I mean for the compilation of the source code, class enhancement tool, content management systems, libraries for caching the data, chat ops tool, clustering components. So you can see it PySpark and Apache Spark Python API that is there. Then the static and dynamic code analysis tools, command line utility. We have this thing. There are modules which will help you to migrate from Python 2 to Python 3. And then we have computer vision and concurrent and parallel execution, multiprocessing and multi-threading, configuration management, cryptography and data analysis and data visualization tools, database and database drivers that are there, that libraries do exist, and there are many of us that we are going to use Kafka and daytime libraries. Debugging tools are there. I mean PDB, that is all being built, and then we have all these things, and then we have deep learning and DevOps tool that are there. Now in this slide, we will discuss about the technical details every front-end programmer or a web developer should know prior to making his site public. His web application should work on all major browsers, including mobile devices, with, and considering there are a lot of screen sizes that is there. So there should be a proper accessibility check of their web application on these browsers. There should be proper deployment strategy so that the users which are currently using or are in like going through the web applications are not impacted. So you should have a proper uh, content configuration management system and deployment methodology, blueprint deployments, etc. You should always have errors which have some significant meaning, not any to the users. It should not be unfriendly error to the direct user. Do not put email address in plain text and they will get spammed. It means that the email address that you are putting in the site can be easily scrapped, and these email address can be used to for other purposes as well. Uh, no follow attribute should be used so that your link should not be used as by the page ranking search engine for the page ranking mechanism in the search engine. Build well considered limits into your site. It means that any login or logout scenario or any sort of things that application uh, functionality, put a proper limit so that you know that either it is operated by human or by a robot. There should be an option for a progressive enhancement direct after a post if the post was successful, to prevent a refresh from submitting again. Again, here there are legal requirement for the accessibility check. Do not made me think. It means that the site should be very easy to understand. It should not let user think how it works and functions. It should be very easy. We will discuss about this thing in detail. Don't basically it gives an idea that don't do develop something from scratch, because it will take time, and don't like do something in your own way. It will, you can say, because a website is used by all applications and there should be a common thing that how it work and how it should not work, so every users at least have a consistency learning it. OWASP developer guide and web security from top to bottom. In SQL injection, what is SQL injection, how to prevent it? Never trust user input or anything else comes from the request, which includes cookies and hidden file fill in the values. Hash passwords. Yes, we have to hash password. Don't use MD5 or SHA because they are, I mean, it recommends that you should use even a slower hashing algorithm, but it should be a new. Do not try to come up, this is what I was talking about. Do not try to come up with your own fancy authentication system. It's easier to think to get wrong in a very way that you can get it wrong. So don't like use some authentication mechanism that is already been used, that is tried and tested, that it is working fine. There are rules to process the credit card information and even the payment details. So please follow the proper guidelines when you have the site in which a credit card or payment transformation is happening place. Use socket layer and transport layer security and socket layer transport security for any site with sensitive data, so that any personal identifiable information should be encrypted. Session hijacking, cross-site scripting, and cross-site request forgery, CSRF, and click checking. What are these things? Keep your system up to date. Make sure the database connection is informed, is secured. I mean, every connection that you are making, every request is you are making should not be accessible from the front end. So you should take care that, I mean, whatever the request is coming up should have a middle layer to make it secure. Make yourself informed about the latest vulnerability and techniques of hacking. And there are a couple of that handbook that are provided by proper good companies. Web developer handbook and Google security handbooks. They have all these details, quite a good details. Non-opener referrer. Use all provided links with target blank. For example, in YouTube, if you see, there are an option to, so that the user can provide link. In those cases, it is necessary that you should append the link with a relational attribute, no open reference, so that it doesn't open in something like new window and there's something that user is not supposed to do. So it usually happens in the free text field, where the users can even put up the URL as well. So in those cases, if another user is using and going by the link, it can cause him issue. So you have to append a relational attribute, no open reference in those cases. Caching is required, and these are all performance related things. So do not use 20 KB images for a repeated background. Compress content for speed, and there are a couple of things, packages that you can use for compressing. Can't combine or can't create multiple CSS, multiple script guide. So I mean, so the browser can reduce the request numbers, or you can say it provide a better performance. And there is there is a guidelines provided by Yahoo for increasing your performance for the site. Use SVG image sprinter for small relational images like toolbars. So static content don't need to access the cookies, so they should be handled by separate in a separate domain by a CDN network. So static content should be very different from your dynamic content, and dynamic content should have a minimum number of requests should be there to render the page. So For example, you should not use a multiple HTTP request to render a single page. It should only work in a very non high performant way. Use a template engine to render the precompiled packages. So template engine is basically when you have the static HTML page and then you basically parse the static and your dynamic content into that template engine to produce your actual HTML site. So that is the work of the template engine. Make sure there is a favicon.io file in the root of your site. I mean, this will result in a lot of, I mean, if it is not there, and because the browser will automatically request it from the user, so keep it there so that you don't have lots of 404. And then there are things for the search engine optimization. So first of all, for foremost, use URLs which are user friendly. Don't like put special characters and hash and all these things inside the URL. It will make the user, it will make it non-user friendly. It will not help the user. Don't use the link, say click here. I mean, instead of use something uh, that the link is actually doing. So basically, if you do this thing, it will provide a good search engine optimization opportunity. Have a XML sitemap. Yeah, so sitemap is necessary. So I mean, all these things. So again, there is a thing about the accessibility. Now here is a question that you should how you should use the JavaScript in processing your browser. So the advice is that you should use as less JavaScript as possible in your site. I mean, no script is becoming more popular. Mobile devices may not work as expected, and then people usually turn off their JavaScript as a part of security. So let's make it Java. I mean, a lesser use of JavaScript in your site should be very useful. And if you are using JavaScript, use those JavaScript lib frameworks like AngularJS, jQuery, and all these things that will make it easier. I mean, you don't have to use a plain Java, vanilla JavaScript. Use some sort of frameworks which are easier and performance optimized. And the main thing is that don't reinvent the wheel, because the web application used by the users, which don't most of the time don't comes with a technical background. So it's better that you should not reinvent the wheel and let you should update yourself with the technology, but don't not go crazy how your site works. Understand that you will be spending 20% of time coding and 80% of time it maintaining. So don't put unnecessary codes, and even if you're coding, proper coding standards and commenting should be used. Good error reporting, and then we have the system of logging. I mean, and even logging the handle and unhandle exceptions so that you know if anything breaks up. You have the idea to debug it, but use a version control system, and then acceptance testing. Acceptance testing comes when the user tests the applications to see whether it's working fine or not. And then these are all things that are any technology side, I think, is mostly applicable for all sort of developers. Now we'll discuss about web frameworks, and these are basically useful when you are dealing with a full stack development. So in this PDF, we will cover most of the scenarios and things which basically a backend developer skips. So why do we need a web framework? So the web frameworks are is I mean, if you try to write a web application from scratch, it's very hard to, and will time it take a lot of time. Web frameworks with all these things have structured in, and they have created proper modules so that you can reuse their code, customize that particular module as per your basis. and then you can utilize that all these things. So the common functionality that a web framework provide is that URL routing, form handling and validation, template engines, ORM, web security, CSRF, SQL injection, XSS, and other storage and retrieval formatted. So these all things basically reduces the effort to write uh, code from scratch when you are actually developing it without a web framework. So when you say that web framework have batteries included, it means these all functionalities are comes bundled with your basic web framework. So Django is an example of that particular web framework. Django ORM cannot work with significant modification on NoSQL databases such as MongoDB and Cassandra. But other frameworks such as Flask and Pyramid are easier to use with non-SQL databases by incorporating external libraries. So you have to understand that the fact that each web framework has its own advantage and disadvantage, right? And you should know that which are the technologies other than the web framework on the front end side, on the back end side you're going to use, and how the web framework is going to make your coding easier. So there, I mean, if you are experienced programmer, you can also mix and match some of the part of one web framework with other. So it becomes easier to understand how to learn the I mean the web framework is that it is better that you start with one web framework and understand it from top to bottom, because even if you take the example of Django, so there are multiple theoretical concepts that you need to know, and these concepts are so deep sometimes that you have to go from all the way to basics to advanced to understand those concepts. So if you try skipping from one framework to another, you will not get the opportunity to work on the advanced concepts, just like ORM and database migrations and login requests, admin pages, etc. Flask is considered as a more Pythonic than the Django webfront because it is common situation. The equivalent Flask frameworks are more explicit. Fast Flask is very easy to get started as a beginner, and then you can import proper external libraries to enhance the feature of the Flask applications. WSGI, pronounced at WSGI, is simply calling convention of web servers to forward requests to web application or frameworks written in Python programming language. The current version of WSGI is specified in Python Enhancement Proposal (PEP). Similarly, just like Flask and Django, we have Bottle, which is also a web framework, and then there are many other web frameworks which have its own advantage and disadvantage. Most common are Flask and Django, and then Pyramid and Bottle, and then depending upon users, these frameworks basically you can choose. Template engine. So template engines take, the strings. Basically, template engines are forms, and then you render values to generate actual HTML pages, right? So they are tokenized string, produce render string with the values in the place of the token output. This works in the same way when you generate a PDF format in which mm, the formatting of the PDF is already defined, just you have to enter the values. So why template render engines are are important? Because you don't have to you can easily generate dynamic content. So the template engines are used to generate for the consistency portion, that all the sites should have a proper base body, and then the HTMLs that you are generating are you don't have to do write the code from scratch. You have just to dynamically render the content for that main site. So you can see your arbitrary code from the template, and then and it takes both of them and generate the template. Template engines, I will say it's easier to understand a template engine. I will go through this PDF file. So there is a PDF file which I will which have uh, all the details for the Django, which basically tells us how you have to use the template rendering and what are the codes using the for loop inside the template, using the while loop, using list, parsing strings, and all these things. So screen will normally look like this, but if you want to use a proper template engines, you can basically don't have to render. You have to use CSS and all these things. So these are all. So what are CSS preprocessors? CSS preprocessors are, you will say, a processor, or you can say an engine that processes your CSS into a standardized CSS. So okay, so there are various flavor of CSS, SARS and less, right? Less Blue Bootstrap framework comes under the less framework. So you write anything inside your use format, and then the preprocessor will convert into a standard CSS format. So the actual CSS format doesn't look very you can see easy to read format, right? So in these preprocessors help us to generate. For example, you directly declare a class to be a model, and then the processor will take care of that particular uh, styles. What is a responsive design? Uh, Minification is a process of reducing the size of the static content asset that needs to be transferred from the web server to the web application. The goal of minification is to make the web page application load faster without changing how the assets are ultimately used and being downloaded. So this is the process. And the CSS framework that we already bootstrap. Why frameworks are important. Then we have the JavaScript and the use of JavaScript in AngularJS and React frameworks, which are high-level frameworks that are built upon the JavaScript and TypeScript languages. What is task queue? So task queue and Redis and Celery, I will try to explain this by a graph that if you have a producer client, for example, let's suppose if your web app is a producer client, and then it creates request. So and RabbitMQ is your exchange which puts forward your request in different queues. So Celery on the other hand, on the server side, is basically creates number of workers. So currently what you are doing in a web application is creating the multiple command lines. It basically consumes all these request. But Celery is basically is an alternative approach where you can directly you don't have to raise multiple worker nodes. It will automatically deploy multiple worker nodes to consume these messages from the queue, and it will take the messages from the queue and consume it. So this is how a normal task queue works. The various flavors of task queue and Celery we will understand. There's one that is one more popular approach is Kafka, and then on the cloud side we have SQS, SNS, SCS, and all these things. And then the static side generators. So what are restructured text or markdown language? These are basically you don't have to write anything. I mean, you just double hash for h2, single hash for h1, and then and hyphen for um, unlisted unlist that you have to use. So you have to basically write normal code in your in your notepad, and then it will take down the the markdown, and the same applies to the restructure test. How the static site generator works, we are already understand your different request, and then it will take your formats and then merge all these things to create a HTML page. HTML static site generators has a problem that it cannot be used to store session informations and all these things if you're only using the static site generator. You have to embed a third party uh, applications, just like a DSQS is a web chatting applications, uh, Jiffy provider, GIF format. So you have to use a third party embedding options to integrate database applications and all these things. You have used into Google Forms, where you have basically used a static site, but you have embedded Google Forms inside your HTML. So that's you have to do. And what is unit testing? And what are the things that are used inside the unit testing? PyTest and knows that you have already used. And these are all other things: unit debugging, integration testing, then PyLint, PyFlex. So these are used for static analysis, code metrics. So I mean, I think you have to understand one of these that is important. So what are WebSockets? WebSocket is a standard protocol of two-way transfer data between client and server. So there are all web servers, Nginx. Uh, I mean, you can use WSGI servers to implement the WebSocket, Green Unicorn, Tornado. All this provide a proper WebSocket implementation. So these are basic theoretical concepts. I will not go over. And these, I think, many of the things are outdated because already many of the things that are being used by frameworks. So you don't have to take care of all these things. But I know sometime that you need to use all these things. And then the APIs. What are the API? You know what the APIs are. Very different between REST and SOAP. We will already discuss what are the different error codes. You need to know the microservices and how you integrate the API. This security, these are things will become very important going forward. SSL is an also important term. I think you are not much aware with this thing. So if you look at this thing, the different components of the application, you should have proper logging mechanism, analytical tool, which site, so that you know that which application part is used, how many time, but which user, and all these things. You monitor the request for any error issues and fallbacks. The API component. I mean, every site has an API enablement also. The CDN for the static site, and the source code control. And these are also source code control and version controlling. And inside your web applications, you should have proper web in virtual environment so that it is using the proper packages. You have proper servers, WSJ servers and web servers, and all these things, backend components. So these all things I think are discussed when you go over the cloud applications to understand these web applications. I think, yeah. Many of the components become very easier to understand when you have at least a hands-on experience on all these things, and you have a you get an idea what they do, and then it's very easier to understand all the things. So you have used upload file thing somewhere. These are all components of, I think, that we will cover in our cloud certifications. So these are basically as comes up as an introductory portion. What are these containers and serverless architecture? Serverless architecture is, you can see up here. Initially, we have bare metal servers in which we have to configure each and everything, right? Just to make a proper environment for our code. AWS and other cloud services has just reduced your need because they are setting up your infrastructure and code and operating system and everything on our behalf. You just have to go and write your business logic in a code, and that will work. So serverless computing is just uh, you are passing your set of responsibilities to third party vendor, and then you don't have to care about the how the servers are up or running or not. You just have to take care of your code. So AWS Lambda, Azure functions, and Google Cloud functions, these are all serverless uh, frameworks that are provided by the user. Yeah, so you should know this thing. I think the front end, from the front end to back end, you have to learn HTML and basics of CSS, basic of JavaScript. And when you talk about JavaScript, you have to understand the basic structs and syntax, the how to manipulate the DOM, understand the concept of event and prototype, etc. So what are prototypes? So it is being asked what are Ajax and XHR, what are ES6 uh, convention of writing the JavaScript code, what are the changes from HTML5 to normal that comes up in HTML, normal HTML. Um, so what are the media queries and responsive websites, and then jQuery, which is an optional thing, but I think the modern web frameworks, it's a legacy one now. So what do you mean by responsive web design, right? And then you come up with the proper knowledge of Git, I think, the package management services, npm and yarn, and what are different SaaS and less things. CSS preprocessor, we already discussed the thing. So Bootstrap, Materialize, Puma. So these are all CSS frameworks and architecture. And then the React.js frameworks, TypeScript, and then you come up the backend services. Now we will discuss about basics of Python, which technically we should have discussed much earlier, but yeah, anyway, there are topics in which are some sort of high level. We will discuss these topics in a very brief. So it was developed by in 1991. It was mainly developed to emphasize brevity, shortness of the code, and then it starts with Python 2 version, and then now we have Python 3 as well. Both are quite different. Not, I mean, many of the things you can list the differences. It doesn't have too many of the differences. Command line start with hash. Python is a dynamically typed language, so you don't need to declare the type of the object. It can automatically be declared at the time of runtime. Require some of the runtime on your system, JVM Python runtime. Okay. We will also discuss about distance in Python 2 and Python 3. So in Python, older Python versions, if you divide two integers, one of them should be a float number in order to get an output of float. But Python 2 inbuilt uh, returns a float if you divide any number. The print function doesn't comes with brackets. So if you don't have the brackets in Python 3, it will so throw a syntax error. Python 2 implicit string type is a sky, but in Python 3 it is a Unicode. So if you see this thing, it is a string type in Python 2, but in Python 2 this is a string type and it becomes a byte. Xrange function is removed, so you only have range function that takes care of everything. In Python 2, range returns a list and xrange is an object that which only generate the items in the range needed, saving memory. In Python 3, range function is removed and xrange has been renamed as range function. So range function is all you have now. The raise keyword doesn't use Python 2 accept both notations, old and new. Syntax Python 3 raise is syntax error if we don't enclose the exception argument in parentheses. Okay, so these all things are if you want to embed features of Python 3 in Python 2 from future imports division. There are things that you don't want in Python 3, but there is a functionality in Python 3. There are things that you don't want in Python 2, but there are functionality in Python 3. So if you want to import from Python 3 to Python 2, you can use this one. X is equal to input. So reading from the keyboard when X is considered as string. So if you want to enter a number of parameters, then you have to split this and then so there is no concept like raw inputs or inputs. There is only inputs. So raw input is deprecated. So how do you check if the string is a keyword? You have just passed the string into a function called keyword e dot is keyword and it will return true or false based on whether the string that you are passing is a keyword or not. have all these things. We already division remainder. So a modulus b is returns the remainder of the function. There is no possible limit on numbers. Numbers can be anything. So if you declare anything number, so as we have seen earlier, that if you do something like very if this thing it is truncated, and then you have this type of okay. So this is how it is there in Python. Transpose of a matrix, you are basically using a list comprehension inside a list comprehension. So there are two for loops, one for loop, and then inside that for loop the actual parameter is also a string comprehension, list comprehension basically. Zip function, you see zip function is used. So if you have a matrix, a list of tuples for row in matrix, you will print each and every row and then zip the matrix. So this is a method to transpose a matrix. If you have a matrix in which these are the rows and then there are four columns, so you can do this by using a zip followed by asterisk of matrix. You can have this thing, and then there are methods inside the numpy array to transpose a matrix as well. This we have already discussed about global variable print statements. What is partial functions? So if you define any functions which you have a, b, c as a parameters, and x is also a parameter, okay. And for example, if you g dot partial, and inside you pass a function f with all these element, and now you call print g of 5, okay. So this is the extra line that you have to write. What are the default parameters you want to pass? Then the one that is missing parameters is will come up here. So the ABC will be 314 and X will be 5. Packing and unpacking. So if you have function ABCD, my list, and func my list, so you can pack the arguments itself. Python 3 has a, by default, the end is a new line, but if you have to explicitly write, you will be getting whatever end that you want. So if you can see Python and the star, and then this thing, you can see and is absent here. So type conversions in Python, you have hex, oct, and then ordinal function to convert into strings, hex function, dict function is used to convert a tuple or order into a dictionary, tuple of a order key values into a dictionary. So if you have tuple ABCD in this thing and you do a dict of the tuple, you will get a dictionary, something like this. Byte object versus string. Byte objects are sequence of byte, whereas strings are sequence of characters. Byte objects are in machine readable form internally. Strings are only in human readable format. Since byte objects are machine readable, they can be directly stored in the disk, whereas string need to be encoded. Then you have to write in on disk. Conversion of string to byte format is encoding, and decoding is a reverse process. Now underscores in Python. So a single and leading underscore is a weak internally used indicator. Example, from start does not import object which name start with a single underscore. It's a weak internal use. So if I single star trailing underscore is used by convention to avoid conflict with the Python keywords. Okay, So if you have declared anything and you don't want to be confused with the class actual class name, this is basically under you append underscore. This is just a naming convention. It is not a rule or something. Double underscore, when naming a class attribute, invokes the name of the name mangling. So inside, like for example, if you have the class and then this function, double underscore is basically making that private, but anyhow you will be able to call that function by class name followed by this thing. Okay, double underscore leading and trailing are the magic attributes to init, import, and file. So you don't, please don't use, because these are already being used by the Python itself. The two things that you already have to discuss is single underscore, double underscore. Single underscore is for internal use, and it is basically something called private. So if you want try to do a while character import, it will not basically import in this way. But if you want to import, you have to explicitly mention the name. Double underscore is basically to avoid name mangling, right? And then we have the ternary operator in Python, on true, if expression, on false. So expression is an inside, and then prior to the if we have the on true statements and the false statement. uh, this is how we declare multiple variable, and then this is how we exchange the values. We have the lambda functions, and this is already we discussed this thing, how the division and modulus operator works. So if you divide minus 5 by 2, it will basically returns minus 3, because it is taking it as a 6. So 5.2.5 is something is rounded to the higher limit 3. Okay, and similarly in this case. So I think we have already discussed this thing earlier, the immutable and immutable cases, and these mathematical functions that you are already using the chaining of the operator. If you look in x is greater than y is equal to x and y. So if we do something like this and this, enumerate, so enumerate function is basically return, if you provide something like a list of this Aston, Audi and McLaren, it will return something like 0 Austin, 1 Audi and 2 McLaren, something like this is used, you see up there. Zip function is basically used to zip to list. So India to Delhi, America to Washington DC, Australia to Canberra. So here you can see this thing. If I have the if I'm using this file and executing this file itself, so it will come up here and search the name of the file, which is file1. Compare the name of the file with main, and because we are running the file directly, it will send file1 is run directly. Okay, and now if in the second case, if you want to import the file1 into a different file2, so you can see if we have imported the file1, so basically it will run the content of file1 first, what we're doing, and then the file, the name is not run by directly, so it will name will be file1, and then file1 is being imported, file1 is being imported, and then it will run to the content of its own file, that is file2. So file2 is now the main, and then this is the name variable is main for the py file executed, and for others it's file name. So file2, if you're directly importing file2, it will be main for file2, and other is will be file1. Difference between double equal to and is operator in Python. The double to operator compares the value of both the operand and checks the value equality, whereas is operator checks whether the both operand refer to the same object or not. So if you see this thing, ID of the both of the list are same, not same. So isn't is operator is there. So here we have how to iterate in list. We're iterating while the number of elements. This is the old method that we use in Python, and then this is the for loop method, and then range of car, and then cars.i, and by using the enumerate function. So these are different methods and how we can access the element of a list. Here we have zip the car plus accessory to make it a dictionary, and then we are printing. So if you look at this thing, there are three lists and you are zipping 1 2 3. So it will basically take the one which has least number and then find the simultaneous index of another file. So 1 alpha, beta 2 2, gamma 3 3, sigma, and 6 5 will be not used up here. So iter function returns the iterator object whisk object. So the next element can be accessed in the next function. Okay, so this is how a generator function works. So in a regular function, what you do is begin and finish. And a yield function, basically when you use a yield function and you return a yield, so it will return the first element and then come up again, it is returned to the pass the control to the calling function, and then it will basically yield the second element, and then back and forth calling will be there. So if you look at the example, yield 1, yield 2, and yield 3. So it will basically yield 1 and then get back to the main method and then come again for the second method. Difference between generator function and the normal function. Both the functions yield, function is paused and the control is transferred to the caller. When the function terminates, stop iterator is raised automatically on the further calls. Local variables and their states are remembered between successive calls. Generator functions contain one or more yield statement instead of return statement. So in a normal function, we have a single return statement. Here we have multiple yield function return. As the method like next enter are implemented automatically, we can iterate through the item using list. Right. So we have the x range things that we already have discussed. Now we have nested functions. So nested functions is basically you can use it as a closure, and then function can be passed as a parameter to other functions which they are calling. And then the decorator function, decorator message. Star args and star quarks is basically used to pass the keyworded argument. So if you have number of elements and you don't want, so arg1 and then star args, for args in argp, because but so hello, and then welcome to the this thing. First argument will be arg1, it will be the hello, and then the simultaneous element will be star args. And then we have quarks. So quarks will be a keyworded element. So if you have something like first is equal to this, second is equal to this, and third is equal to this, right? So you can have this kind of statement. when this thing is possible. So the first statement is args and then second is quarks. So the first statement will be high and then followed by your this thing. So what is Python closures? A closure is a function object that remembers value in closing scopes even if they are not present in the memory. It is recorded that it stores a function together with the environment and mapping associated with each variable. So basically I will go with an example. If you see this inner function which print the text and take the text from the outer text. So if you want like my function is equal to outer function you are calling, passing this text and return the inner function, and then you call the inner function and it will return you the output function. So what is it is returning is the method, and then for example if you have multiple calls inside a method, it's something you can do up here. So garbage collection. So in garbage collections, Python programmer doesn't have to care about creating and destroying the element. Python itself take cares of the to collect all the garbage memory and destroy them. So memory management is internal process and the programmer doesn't have to care about your this thing. Java as well as Python both are not 100% object-oriented programming language. Just try to read why it is not so. So how garbage collection happens in Python is that there are two strategies. One is reference counting and then garbage collection. Reference counting is that it counts the number of references to that particular object, and if the number of references is zero, it will basically delete all those. Right. So if you can see this thing, so these are multi-threading examples. I think we're already going to discuss all these things in detail. And these are the exception classes: try, except, else, and finally. Let me go to this thing once again. Yeah, it's I think these all things we already have discussed on. So this is a different type of environment you can use. You can use virtual environment, pip environment, and conda environment. Most of the time we use the pip environment, and this is the decorator functions. So if you can look uh, inside a function,